Hollywood's golden age is often remembered through a soft, glamorous lens, perfect smiles, polished manners, and timeless films that still define classic cinema. But according to Ron Howard, that image hides a much darker reality. Behind the studio lights and carefully controlled publicity machines, some of the era's biggest stars were anything but charming. Their on-screen heroism often masked cruelty, manipulation, and behavior that would shock audiences today. Ron Howard, who grew up inside Hollywood as a child actor before becoming one of its most respected directors, has spoken openly about the truth behind old Hollywood's power structure. He has explained how the studio system protected certain actors at all costs, allowing destructive personalities to thrive unchecked. Contracts, publicists, and fear kept secrets buried, while victims were silenced or pushed aside. What makes Howard's revelations so unsettling is not just who these actors were, but how long their behavior remained hidden. These weren't fringe performers or forgotten names, they were celebrated icons, praised as gentlemen, role models, and legends of the screen. Some were known for playing heroes, fathers, and romantic leads, while privately displaying control, violence, or deep moral corruption. In this story, we look at the 6 actors Ron Howard has pointed to as the most disturbing examples of Hollywood's golden age darkness. These are not rumors pulled from tabloids, but patterns of behavior later confirmed through biographies, testimonies, and industry records. Their actions reveal how fame, power, and silence created an environment where cruelty could flourish. As the truth comes into focus, the golden age no longer looks so golden, and the line between myth and reality begins to crack. Ron Howard has often emphasized that the Hollywood golden age was built on image control. Studios didn't just make movies, they manufactured reputations. Actors were sold to the public as flawless icons, while behavior behind closed doors was hidden, excused, or aggressively buried. According to Howard, this system created an environment where certain personalities, especially those with power and box office value, could act without consequences. When people talk about evil in this context, he explains, they're not talking about villains in films, but patterns of cruelty, abuse of power, and moral corruption that went unchecked for decades. One of the most frequently cited figures from this era is John Wayne. Publicly, Wayne was marketed as the ultimate American hero, strong, honorable, and principled. Privately, numerous biographers and colleagues have described a very different man. Accounts detail extreme intolerance, aggressive behavior on sets, and the use of influence to intimidate those who disagreed with him. Ron Howard has referenced how studio protection allowed such personalities to dominate environments without accountability. Wayne's power meant complaints rarely went anywhere, reinforcing a culture where fear replaced professionalism. Another troubling example often discussed in Golden Age retrospectives is Errol Flynn's reputation as a charming rogue mass serious allegations that followed him throughout his career. Court cases, documented testimony, and later biographies paint a picture of a man whose behavior toward women was deeply problematic. While he was acquitted in high-profile trials, Howard and other industry insiders have pointed out that acquittal did not erase the ethical concerns surrounding his actions. Studios continued to promote him, prioritizing profit over principle. Ron Howard has also spoken about how Clark Gable, long remembered as the ultimate romantic leading man, benefited from studio silence. Later historical research and testimonies revealed allegations of sexual assault that were deliberately suppressed to protect his image. At the time, victims had no platform, no protection, and no power to challenge a studio-backed star. Howard describes this as one of the clearest examples of how evil in Hollywood was often institutional, not just personal. The Golden Age also included actors whose cruelty manifested through control and humiliation rather than scandal. Humphrey Bogart, while respected for his talent, was described by several colleagues as emotionally abusive on set, particularly toward those he perceived as weaker or less influential. According to accounts from the era, verbal intimidation and deliberate isolation were tools used to maintain dominance. Howard has explained that such behavior was normalized under the studio system, framed as artistic temperament rather than misconduct. Another name frequently examined is James Cagney, whose explosive temper was legendary. While some viewed it as intensity, multiple production records and crew testimonies describe violent outbursts, threats, and physical confrontations. Howard has noted that when studios rewarded these personalities with leading roles, it sent a message that cruelty equaled strength, and that power excused behavior. What ties these figures together is not rumor, but pattern. Ron Howard stresses that Golden Age Hollywood rewarded control, dominance, and silence. Actors who generated money were insulated from consequences, while those harmed by them were often blamed or erased. The system itself became complicit, turning moral failure into an industry standard. This is why Howard avoids romanticizing the era. To him, acknowledging these truths doesn't destroy classic cinema, it contextualizes it. It explains how so many victims were ignored, and why these stories are only fully emerging decades later, and this is just the beginning. The deeper we look, the darker the Golden Age becomes. Ron Howard has explained that focusing only on individual actors misses a larger, uncomfortable truth. The Hollywood Golden Age was powered by a system that quietly rewarded intimidation. In this environment, actors with volatile or cruel behavior were often described as difficult, temperamental, or intense, euphemisms that softened conduct which today would be unacceptable. Howard has noted that studios normalized fear as a management tool, allowing certain stars to weaponize their status against coworkers, particularly women and lower-ranking crew. One frequently discussed figure in this context is Spencer Tracy, widely celebrated as a serious, principled actor. Tracy's off-screen life has been portrayed by biographers as deeply troubled. Accounts describe heavy alcohol abuse and emotionally destructive behavior toward those closest to him. While not framed as criminal, Howard has referenced Tracy as an example of how personal demons were ignored when talent and prestige were involved. Studios protected his image, while those affected by his behavior bore the consequences in silence. Another name often examined is Gary Cooper, whose public persona embodied quiet decency and integrity. Later biographies, however, reveal a pattern of emotional detachment and manipulation within personal relationships. Howard has emphasized that evil in old Hollywood did not always appear as overt violence. Sometimes it manifested as exploitation, using power imbalances to control, discard, or emotionally harm others without accountability. Howard has also spoken about actors whose cruelty was embedded in ideology rather than action alone. Lionel Barrymore, a respected actor and director, has been cited in historical records as someone who abused authority behind the scenes, humiliating performers and crew members. His behavior was often excused as old-school discipline, reflecting an era where domination was confused with leadership. According to Howard, this mindset allowed repeated mistreatment to continue unchecked. The Golden Age also produced stars whose reputations for kindness masked deeply troubling private conduct. Tyrone Power, long idolized as a romantic icon, became the subject of serious allegations decades after his death, detailed in biographies and sworn testimonies. Howard has pointed out that these stories were not shared to shock, but to highlight how completely studios controlled narratives. Victims had no leverage, and silence was often the only option for survival. What deeply disturbs Howard is how consistently the system prioritized money over morality. When complaints surfaced, studios investigated not to protect victims, but to assess risk. If an actor remained profitable, problems were buried. Contracts included morality clauses that punished the powerless while shielding the powerful. Howard describes this as institutionalized corruption, where harm became a cost of doing business. He has also acknowledged that not every actor listed was universally cruel at all times. Complexity matters. Some were capable of generosity and artistry, yet repeatedly caused harm. Howard argues that acknowledging this duality is essential. Evil in this context was not cartoonish villainy, it was repeated choice, enabled by silence and rewarded by success. This is why Howard rejects the myth that the Golden Age was simply a different time. While social standards have evolved, cruelty and exploitation were understood even then. The difference was enforcement. Power protected itself, and those without it paid the price. As these truths come to light, Howard believes audiences deserve honesty. Loving classic films does not require denying the harm that occurred behind the camera. In fact, understanding it honors those who were silenced. The stories emerging now do not destroy cinema history, they complete it. And as the list continues, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Fame did not corrupt Hollywood's golden age. It revealed what the system was willing to tolerate. Ron Howard has pointed out that one of the most damaging myths of Hollywood's golden age is the belief that cruelty was rare. In reality, it was often systematic, subtle, and culturally reinforced. Actors who ruled through fear were not seen as immoral. They were seen as powerful. Howard explains that many studios confused dominance with authority, allowing stars to create hostile environments as long as the cameras kept rolling and the profits kept coming. A revealing example often discussed by historians is Charles Laughton. While widely praised for his talent, numerous accounts from colleagues describe a pattern of emotional manipulation and humiliation, particularly toward those he perceived as vulnerable. According to biographies and production testimonies, Laughton's behavior thrived in a system that excused emotional cruelty as artistic seriousness. Howard has noted that such figures rarely faced consequences because their abuse left no physical evidence, only long-term psychological damage. Another disturbing case involves Bela Lugosi, not as a perpetrator, but as evidence of how the system consumed people. Howard uses Lugosi's story to illustrate a different kind of evil industry neglect. After profiting enormously from his image, studios abandoned Lugosi when his health and addiction worsened. He was exploited, discarded, and humiliated. Howard argues that evil in the Golden Age wasn't limited to individual actors. It was also embedded in how studios treated those who were no longer useful. Howard has also referenced director-actors who blurred lines of authority, creating environments where intimidation was routine. Figures like Orson Welles, while brilliant, were known for dominating collaborators and dismissing dissent. While not criminal, this behavior reinforced a culture where power silenced opposition. Howard stresses that unchecked authority, whether from actors or directors, created ecosystems where abuse flourished quietly, one of the most unsettling aspects. Howard highlights is how women were systematically silenced. Actresses who complained about mistreatment were labeled difficult and blacklisted. Careers ended not because of lack of talent, but because speaking up was considered disloyal. Howard explains that many of the evil actors of the era were able to continue because their victims disappeared from the industry, erased from memory and opportunity. Howard has also addressed how some actors weaponized charm. Public warmth became a shield. Off-camera cruelty was dismissed as rumors because audiences could not reconcile it with the persona they adored. This psychological protection was stronger than contracts. Fans didn't want to believe their heroes were capable of harm, and studios relied on that disbelief. What makes these revelations especially important today is the pattern. No single incident defines the Golden Age's darkness. It was repetition, same behaviors, same cover-ups, same outcomes. Power flowed in one direction and accountability flowed in none. Howard emphasizes that these truths aren't meant to assign modern moral judgments retroactively, but to acknowledge harm that was already understood by those living through it. He also reminds audiences that history often protects winners. Those who survived the system wrote the memoirs, controlled the archives, and shaped the narrative. Those who were harmed rarely left records. This imbalance explains why so many stories are only emerging decades later, once fear and contracts no longer apply. By confronting this reality, Howard believes Hollywood can finally move forward honestly. Pretending the Golden Age was innocent only perpetuates injustice. Understanding its darkness allows future generations to recognize warning signs: early unchecked power, silence, and idol worship. As Howard puts it, cinema history is not weakened by truth. It is strengthened by it. And with one final section remaining, the question becomes clear: why does acknowledging this past still matter today? Ron Howard has said that confronting the darker side of Hollywood's golden age is not about canceling the past, but about understanding it honestly. For decades, the industry benefited from selective memory, choosing glamour over accountability. By acknowledging the harm caused by powerful figures, Howard believes Hollywood can finally break the cycle that once allowed cruelty to flourish behind prestige and talent. One of the most important lessons Howard emphasizes is how easily admiration can turn into blind loyalty. Golden Age actors were not just performers. They were cultural symbols. Audiences trusted them, studios profited from them, and media protected them. This created an environment where accusations were dismissed as jealousy or fabrication. Howard notes that this same pattern has repeated throughout entertainment history, proving that the issue was never confined to one era. Howard also stresses that many victims of Golden Age abuse never sought revenge or public recognition. Most simply wanted safety, dignity, and the ability to work without fear. Their silence was often misinterpreted as consent, when in reality it was survival. By telling these stories now, historians and filmmakers are not rewriting history, they are restoring missing voices. Another key point Howard raises is that talent does not excuse harm. Some of the actors discussed were undeniably gifted, leaving behind films that continue to inspire. Howard argues that it is possible and necessary to hold two truths at once, appreciating artistic achievement while acknowledging moral failure. Separating art from behavior does not mean ignoring victims. It means refusing to let success erase responsibility. Howard has also highlighted how modern Hollywood still struggles with power imbalance. While progress has been made, the Golden Age serves as a warning. Whenever careers depend on silence, abuse finds space to grow. The old studio system may be gone, but its lessons remain relevant. Transparency, accountability, and equal power structures are the only safeguards against repeating history. In reflecting on the six actors most often cited in these discussions, Howard avoids naming them as monsters. Instead, he describes them as products of a system that rewarded dominance and punished vulnerability. Some abused power directly. Others benefited from silence. All were enabled by an industry more concerned with profit than people. This perspective reframes the phrase, most evil. It is not about judging individuals by modern standards, but about recognizing patterns of harm that were understood even then, yet ignored. Evil in this sense was not always loud. It was quiet, protected, and normalized. By bringing these stories into the open, Howard believes audiences gain something valuable: awareness. When myths collapse, truth takes their place. The Golden Age no longer needs to be seen as a flawless era. It can be understood as a time of great art and deep injustice existing side by side. Ultimately, Howard's message is not one of bitterness, but responsibility. Remembering the past accurately honors those who suffered in silence and challenges future generations to do better. Hollywood's history does not lose its magic when the truth is told. It gains depth, meaning, and humanity. And in that honesty, the real legacy of cinema finally begins to emerge.